Can you hear? There we go. Good evening. My name is Brandy Hamilton. I am the CEO here at Suncoast Behavioral Health Center, and I would like to welcome each of you this evening for our event. I would especially like to thank Jessica Spencer with the Manatee County Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition for reaching out to us so that we had the ability to help sponsor. So it's an honor that she did so, and we appreciate that. We're glad to have each of you. Suncoast has been in the community now. We opened our doors September 1st, and we are an inpatient mental health facility for children, adolescents, and adults, 60 beds. We're a Baker Act receiving facility and an inpatient voluntary facility for those folks. So again, we'd like to welcome you. I do have staff that'll be in the room for this evening, so if there's anything that you need, please let my staff know, and we're happy to help you. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Jessica.
Good evening, everybody. And we were kind of joking earlier, we did not plan this outfit. We are wearing the exact same color. It was not planned. The both of us, this is the only thing that we have in this color, so this is pretty funny. But Brandy, we're diehards together, so this is awesome. So thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, everyone here at Suncoast Behavioral Health Center for allowing us to be here at this venue tonight. It's partnerships like these that help us achieve greatness in our community. So we are so thankful. We love this room, and we're filled, and thank you so much for all of you for coming. I would like to welcome you. This is our very first Dinner and Learn, and we certainly hope it's not our last. If you like what we do at the Coalition and you're interested in what we do, please visit us. And for those of you watching at home, please visit www.drugfreemanatee.org. We would love to have you join our coalition. There is information on the back table over there as well. We are always excited for new people to join and help with our community, but you just being here tonight is wonderful, and so we appreciate it. We have had a continued epidemic here in the state with prescription drugs. Here in Manatee, we've had great success working with our Attorney General, our local law enforcement, and actually our code enforcement to help reduce the number of pill mills that we had here in the county. But as we know, when you cut off the head of one snake, another snake appears. And so when the prescription drugs become harder for people to obtain or more expensive for them to obtain, they will turn to heroin and other drugs. In 2013, there were 16 confirmed overdoses here in our county due to heroin. In 2014, that number nearly tripled to 57. That's more than one person a week. So we have an issue here, and I am so glad that you guys are here in this room with us. In light also of the recent events we've had in our community, we are really pleased to bring our guest speaker here tonight, Dr. Sharon Kelly. She's an amazing speaker. She serves as CEO of Associates in Emergency Medical Education Incorporated. She earned her Bachelor of Science at the University of South Florida in Pre-Professional Sciences with a major in biology and a minor in chemistry. She then went on to obtain her master's degree in drug chemistry from the University of Florida, and then she obtained her PhD in toxicology, again from USF. While completing her bachelor's degree, Sharon served as a Tampa police officer and has utilized this background in the development of numerous lectures provided for medical and legal professionals, as well as community organizations and groups just like ours. She has practiced in pre-hospital, hospital, and aeromedical venues and has instructed thousands of critical care and emergency medicine professionals over the span of her 20-year career. If we have time for questions, there are pieces of paper on your table. You can just write down a question and just raise your hand, and I'll kind of be moving the room and I'll grab that from you. If we have time for questions at the end, we will take them from there. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sharon Kelly.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all tonight. And I definitely want to take an opportunity to thank Suncoast and Palms and Jessica. And I always say if you ever get weird with Jessica, we're taking her, all right? Because over the last 2 months, everybody in my office knows Jessica. and how efficient she is, and just her heart. And we so appreciate, everything that you have done. So she's kept me on track, and that's not the easiest thing to do. So I talk like I'm on meth. I am not. All right, so if we get going too fast, you just slow me down. My teeth are still intact and my skin's good. All right, so if we get onto a topic, please do write it down, because I'll be here after we're finished as well, and I know that we're going to try and take some time for questions at the end. I have had just absolutely an amazing career when I've been so blessed, and I do teach critical care and emergency medicine. That's been my long stay. But along the way, as being a cop, I was actually a TPD officer because I wanted to go to med school, and I couldn't find a job in the hospital that would allow me to go to school. So one of my friends, because I'd been on the street as a medic, and they said, why don't you be a cop? And I thought, you're kidding. And I've never fallen in love with something, so much. And so now I've kind of kept one foot on medicine and one foot on the other side of law enforcement. And when it came to the whole prescription drug epidemic, that was perfect, because I had an opportunity to share with law enforcement, listen, what you may be seeing is not dirty. This is dirty, what you're seeing. It was hard, because a lot of times, why are these people prescribing all these drugs? Well, the insurance, it's the insurance makes them do like 3 months at a time. So, but then I got a chance to go around to medicine and say, listen, this isn't right. This is illegal. This whole opioid thing, and starting to educate the physicians, and that has been my major role as far as the opioid issues. That I have to thank you in this room for the hard work that you've done in helping reduce that. So by teaching the doctors, you need to be a little bit street smarter. You need to know who's playing you. You need to know the signs of doctor shopping. So Jessica said it very well, though. When you whack-a-mole one thing, something else is gonna increase. Now, all my law enforcement, and I see most of you in uniform, and if you're not in uniform, I won't ask you to raise your hand. But one of the things that we kept talking about through the whole prescription opioid epidemic was, to go back to heroin, because heroin was easy. It's illegal. I can make the arrest. That's not a problem. I get you with it. There's no, do you have a script for your heroin? What doctor prescribed it? So we knew 5 years ago that this day was going to be here. I have to give Attorney General Bondi a lot of credit for this as well. I've had the unique opportunity to teach on her training teams, and I think she and the helm and our law enforcement, people like you, have helped us reduce the pill mill issues. Okay, but wasn't it Newton who said, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction? My dissertation included the fact that even though we are seeing less pill mills, we are seeing a tremendous number of overdoses coming in through our emergency departments. That, coupled with a changing economic climate in that more physicians are now afraid to give opioids, so the people who do legitimately need pain are showing up in my emergency departments. And also, too, we are definitely seeing a rise in heroin. Endocarditis, University of South Florida, I'm in their toxicology department, and we're now starting a ClinTox program, and I've been asked to be the director, which I'm so excited about. But that's one of the things that we were looking at, is what is the sequelae, what is the sequel, what is the fallout from getting rid of the pill mills? And we still have them. I mean, it's just they're a lot more covert, and they're a lot less. And that's a major triumph for us. But so now what do we do with the aftermath? What do we do with the ERs that are seeing still opioid overdoses, because now we're seeing all the drug seekers because the doctors have gotten scared or smart or ethical or whatever, and they're finally understanding. And all along we had good ethical doctors. They were just the ones that were not mentioned. We had a lot of doctors who were trying to learn more. Nobody teaches what we're going to be talking about tonight in med school. They do not get drugs 101, especially street drugs 101. So to their credit, I'm really proud of our physician society, the ethical doctors who've really stepped up to the plate, but they don't know what to do about this either. So I just want to talk about a couple of things with regards to heroin. First of all, I don't think that there's a person in this room, and Jessica's already said it, that doesn't know that we have a major problem now with heroin. We anticipated it, maybe not to the degree that we thought. I mean, we've always had heroin. I mean, that's nothing new. Heroin's 60s, 70s. But now, with the opioids being decreased as far as the prescriptions, they are going to turn to something. All right, so we know that Attorney General Holder has already placed the United States into a state of emergency, with regards to the heroin. We know that heroin-related emergency department visits just from 2007 to 2011 have gone up, and I don't think it's any coincidence that we're seeing the rise go up as the number of pill mills go down. I think that that's kind of a logic. Also, too, the heroin seizures, which I thought was interesting. I have a slide coming up that talked about, it was a quote from Delray Beach Police Department with regards to this, but we know our heroin seizures are increasing all the more. As people become panicky about not being able to hook to their opioid connections, to their oxycodone, fentanyl, methadone, they are going to be searching out the heroin. And of course, what are drugs? Drugs are a market. Drugs are a business. So any good business person, whether they're ethical or not, but a good business mind knows, hey, we need to start pumping in more heroin because these people are easily going to be able to turn to this because they're already hooked on an opioid or an opiate. So I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about that. One of the things we always stress in our class is internalization, not memorization. And I really would like to kind of give you a little bit of a background without totally boring you. We're not going to get into the chemistry so much, but I do think it's important for you to have a little bit deeper understanding. We're always striving for that. We want a little bit deeper understanding. Don't just give us the fluff, because if you truly understand something, you're going to be in a lot better position to tackle it. Okay, so first of all, opiates, opioids, they are two different things. The true opiate is something that comes actually from the opium plant. It's a pure, all right? But we can alter that somewhat and come up with a semi-synthetic opioid or a fully synthetic opioid, which has nothing from the opium plant whatsoever. Now, I'm going to talk to you in a second about why that's important for you to know, because I respect your time too much to get up here and filibuster. If I'm saying it, I really try to think it out, is that this could hopefully be something valuable for you. So what do we use it for? What are opioids and opiates used for? Well, the first thing that probably comes to everybody's mind is pain, right? And there's a lot of good legitimate uses. If you've just been cut open, if you've just been in a surgery, certainly you want something for pain. Part of my dissertation was based on pain as the fifth vital sign. How many of y'all have heard that phrase? Okay, well, I kind of debunked that a little bit, because a sign is something that I can measure. In fact, I started off my dissertation with Merriam's medical dictionary, is that a sign is something that we can measure. A symptom is something the patient relates to us. So when a patient comes to me in the emergency department or in the street and says, my pain is an 8, I don't have a pain-o-meter. So I'm having to take the word of that patient, and that became a major issue with regards to the prescribing of opiates and opioids. Because if you could see my stats, and I am welcome to send my dissertation to any of you if you need some light reading or you're having trouble sleeping, okay, I'll be more than happy to send you all 143 pages of it. But the physicians, and a lot of times the physicians did take a bad rap for that. If you're my doctor and I go in and I say my pain's a 9 and you don't treat it, I could show you the stats on what the perceptions of the doctors are. As one, they can be held to civil litigation. There's case law. 2, what is the Board of Medicine going to do with me? Because if I don't treat pain adequately, what am I going to do? And 3, and this is the big one, Joint Commission. Joint Commission and CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, use that as one of their metrics for reimbursement. So if I come into the emergency department and I tell you I'm in pain and you don't treat that pain and I make a complaint, then it could have a lot of ramifications. Do you know probably the saddest statistic that I got out of my queries of ED physicians as part of my research? I asked them how many of them, either they or their colleague, had been formally disciplined, formally, not just an email, call, formally disciplined, written up, punitive actions against them for refusal to write a prescription for opioids for a patient demanding it. And do you know what the percentage was? 40%. 40% have been formally disciplined if they didn't provide these. So what we have done is, I don't think it's any secret that we've created a need and a craving and a dependency and an addiction in some cases for opioids. So there's a lot of economic as well as regulatory factors that have gone into this whole opioid issue. But the thing is that analgesia, what's the next thing, is euphoria. I'm convinced a lot of my people in the street, and I still do ride-alongs with law enforcement. I still serve as a consultant for a number of law enforcement agencies. they're not using it for pain, they're using it for euphoria. And see, that's where you all come in. Why does somebody want to get high? I mean, when you go down to the base level, is why do they want to get high? Why do you risk an arrest from something now that's illegal? I think that's where we need you as far as mental health and faith-based to find out what's the hole in the person that needs to be filled with this drug. Because until we do that, you're always going to have this problem. And I don't think that they're taking it for coughs. You know, I mean, some of you guys may have some cough medicine with codeine. You don't need to flush it right now because of that. It's okay. It was prescribed. But you can see, I mean, so why do people want? And so what I want you to think about is think about the patients, maybe even people that you've arrested before, that what category would they fall into? And I think the vast majority would go back to the euphoria that comes from this. So what are your true opiates? Now, again, if you have pure opium, which we don't see too much, my law enforcement people, have any of you guys ever gotten an opium bust? I mean, pure opium? Anybody in the room? We came close to one time. It was a derivative of it, but I've never actually seen the pure opium here in the United States. Now, morphine, MS-Contin, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with that. And the codeine, again, that could even be cough medicine with codeine, and also a drug called thebaine. So these are going to be your actual opiates. But the ones that look a lot more familiar to you are probably these, especially in light of the last 5 years of fighting the prescription opioid issues. Heroin is a semi-synthetic, hydromorphone, Dilaudid, the #1 drug requested in the emergency departments. 98% of those responding to our surveys said Dilaudid is the #1 drug that's being requested. It's not Oxy. It's not Vicodin, it's not Percocets, I want the D drug, Dilaudid. I want the Dilaudid drug. That's the one we always kind of laugh at. You know, and my favorite one is when they come in and they say, I'm allergic to Tylenol, but Vicodin works great. You know, it is Tylenol. So you gotta love them. They're not always the brightest crayons in the box. Opana, OxyContin, Percocet, and Suboxone. Now I put a little asterisk by buprenorphine, Suboxone, because that is only a partial opioid agonist, and it's being used by many of our good pain management people and addictionologists to actually bring people off the opioids. So that's a good thing. Now, the top one, even though we've started talking about heroin, I will say even since the time that I was invited to this, fentanyl has become a major problem. And I'll show you some slides a little bit later on that as well. But the Duragesic patches, we get them, they're called chicleting. Now, and I tell my new narcotics guys all the time, I said, you need to check the freezers. If you're doing a search warrant in a house, open the refrigerator and open the freezer and start moving stuff out of the way. Because unfortunately, the intel that we've received have been such that a lot of these Duragesic patches that are placed on for pain, it's continual absorption, subdermal or through the dermal absorption, that we're afraid that some of the nursing facilities that the nurses' aides are selling them out the back door. You can get a lot of money for fentanyl. Now, when I speak to youth groups, in fact, if any of you guys have church groups or whatever, that's a ministry to me. I speak at no charge, for them. I go down and I talk to kids and I say, if you don't hear anything else I say tonight, say, please do not do fentanyl. Fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine, and we now even have a super fentanyl that's out there. And fentanyl, a lot of times, is used to cut heroin, just like we have anti-worming agents that we use to cut cocaine now, right? So fentanyl has become a major player with heroin. So a lot of times you'll see those two in conjunction. Fentanyl is prescribed, okay, but again, we know that they have means of getting it. Methadone, there's methadone clinics in many cities, and hopefully with the goal of pulling people off. I will tell you though that and I don't think this is law enforcement, you don't have to agree with this, or at least state it, but one of our big concerns with methadone, and it has been my experience, I will admit as well, is that a lot of people use that as just a means of getting another fix. If I can't get to my heroin, I'm going to use that. Now, does that mean we throw the methadone clinics out the door? No. But what I'm saying is you have to be a little street smart, in that regard as well. And meperidine, Demerol, I don't find too much Demerol out in the street. I mean, you may have, and again, I'm anxious to talk to some, off the record after we get done with what are you seeing, because that helps me know what to prepare for our lectures. Tramadol. Tramies are huge in the high schools. Now, tramadol is a non-opiate. It's a non-opioid, but what it does is it hits the receptor. Do any of you guys know what receptor the opioids hit? The mu receptor. That's big, is when you're looking at chemistry, you're looking for what receptor site kind of turns on all the euphoria and turns on the effects. So these drugs actually do hit that same receptor, and we do see it a lot in the teenagers and the high schoolers that are not going to the hardcore opioids and opiates. All right, so what are your signs? You have a patient that you're treating. You have a client, because I know some of you don't refer to him necessarily. You have a suspect that you're treating. What are the classic signs of the opioid overdose? Well, remember, an opiate or opioid, and I'm just going to kind of refer to it as opioids from this point forward to even include the opiates. What is that? What type of drug is this? Is it an upper or downer? It's a downer, right? Good. Okay, so does that mean it's a CNS stimulant or a CNS depressant? CNS depressant. Now, you're professionals. I know the vast majority of you are professionals. You want to start terming it in that direction because it's going to kind of help you know where to go in a few more directions by knowing that. So when you have a CNS stimulant on board, adrenaline, we all have adrenaline. We're working out. We need that adrenaline kicking in. You're in the middle of a search warrant that's starting to go bad. What's going to start happening? Man, that adrenaline, that CNS stimulant is going to kick in. So what is a CNS stimulant? What was adrenaline? Why were we created with adrenaline? For fight or flight. All right, so what does that mean your heart rate's going to do if you're on a CNS stimulant? What about your respirations? Okay, what about your pupils? They're going to blow open because why? The whole purpose of that is the animal at nighttime that's hunting blows open that pupil so they can take in more light and be able to focus and see. So I always looked when I was on the street and I was interviewing people, I had sunglasses needed to come off because I wanted to see those pupils. Because why? Pupils tell you a lot. If they're big and wide, indoors, and it's not super dark lighting, then that can tell me something. So let's reverse that. So now if you have a CNS stimulant, heart rate goes down, respirations go down, and pupils go down to like a pinpoint size. Another reason that if we're dealing with something on an opioid, you'll see their pupils are like the end of a pinhead. Right, so that can tell you, and again, you want every little clue you have, whether it's law enforcement and it's somebody you're interviewing, if you're an attorney in here or a guardian ad litem, you want to know, is this person telling you the truth? That's one of the things, I get calls from lawyers all the time. Sharon, I had this client that this, or I have a witness, I'm not real sure I'm believing them. So I have an off company called Kelly Consulting Group, and that's what we do. We review, we help prepare cases, we kind of help find resources. So one of the things that you want to start off is, very first, we all know people lie to us. Have you ever had somebody lie to you? Yeah. We've gone through weeks where I wasn't sure anybody told me the truth, much less lied. So so the thing is that a lot of times your first impression, especially if you're I think there was somebody from probation here, especially, just looking at them, you can pick up a lot. One of my street drugs lectures is called What Your Exam Tells You That Your Patient Will Not. So just little nuances like that. So one of the concerns is this bottom one. We get so many people in the emergency department, and also I've had an amazing opportunity to intern with the Pinellas County Forensics Lab. They really are amazing at the medical examiner's office. They are one of the highest level labs you'll ever see. So one of the things that you repetitively see when reviewing medical examiner's reports is that these patients have what they call pulmonary edema. Okay, so let's go back to anatomy and physiology for a second. So your heart's beating, and it's taking blood through the lungs, right? And what happens in the lungs is that lungs pick up oxygen, all right? And now you have oxygenated blood that shoots back out to your heart, and life is good. Okay, so what happens, though, when you take a drug that decreases your ventilations to 4 a minute, when you normally breathe 10 to 12? And your heart rate doesn't go all the way down to 4, it might, but let's say 40. So what's going to happen is you now have a major mismatch going on in the lungs. And so what develops is something called pulmonary edema. Now, where you may have seen that is they say they're gurgling. We get the ones a lot of times that are brought into the ED, they may subsequently die, and they say, we heard them snoring. They had foam coming out of their mouth. I would be happy to show you pictures. You could Google what this looks like. But unfortunately, that's one of the saddest things that we see coming in through the emergency department. As soon as we see that foam coming out of the mouth and that patient's pulseless, we don't a lot of times have high hopes for that. So that is going to be one of the things that you need to kind of plug in. And then the kids feel the guilt because they say, well, we thought they were breathing because we heard them gurgling. So this is classic. We call this the triad of opioid death, is the CNS depression, the pinpoint pupils, and also the pulmonary edema. Because once that has started, the lungs are not adequately able to function, and the body's not going to be adequately able to function. So one of the things that I'm hoping through prevention is talk to your clients about this, talk to your kids. Say, listen, if you ever see any foam coming out, if you hear them and they sound like they're gurgling or they're snoring, you need to call 911 now. All right, but of course, if they're doing an illegal drug, that's going to be hampered. They're not going to want to call 911. We get a lot of them just thrown into the ER parking lot, and somebody lets us know and we go out and pick them up, right? So, but pulmonary edema is one of the issues. One of the chronic things that we do see, and I mentioned endocarditis. Unfortunately, and I'm not going to go into too much depth, okay, but what is itis? It's an inflammation, right? Like arthritis, tonsillitis, so when you think about an inflammation of the heart, what's happening is that a lot of the products of these drugs, heroin, we know that there's a ton of fillers that are put with this. What it is it's actually contaminating the heart. It's causing infections. Another thing that we're seeing, unfortunately, quite a bit of is spinal abscesses. When we see that, we all kind of just roll our eyes. We do what I call ocular aerobics. It's like, you start looking for the pop marks at that point in time. But remember, with heroin, and that I think is another reason why we're seeing more heroin, is you don't have to shoot it. You can snort it. I mean, you can smoke it. It's now coming in forms that you can ingest that doesn't necessarily mean finding a vein. So because of that, in fact, one of the most heartbreaking slides I have in my street drugs lecture is the one where they, with CNN reporting out of Dallas, I believe it was, that the kids were getting $2 packets of heroin in the elementary schools. Because what they do is they mix it with Kool-Aid, all right, and they think it's really, cool to, snort like they do with the rappers and some of the shows that they see. So, and they're snorting sweet because they've mixed it with Kool-Aid. So what better way to turn a kid, into somebody who's dependent? When we see kids that young, we've had 3 6-year-olds, no, I apologize, 9-year-olds. We've had 3 9-year-olds in Polk County actually in rehab for meth. So it's really very sad to me to see these children at such young ages getting involved in something. They don't even know what they're getting involved in. So definitely skin, a lot of times we see the abscesses on the skin from if they are shooting. We see obviously a lot of meth, and never lose sight of the fact of polypharming. Just because they're doing heroin and fentanyl doesn't mean that they're not doing CNS stimulants as well. So we want to address all the needs, of the abuse, not just some. It's just tonight we're focusing, on the CNS depressants. Now, laboratory testing. Okay, so how do I know? I know if you're in a probation, if you're a guardian ad litem, you pay attention to this, is drug testing. Okay, drug testing has a lot of debate because of the costs associated with it, right? So I just kind of tried to break it down because all tests are not alike. First of all, the point of care. Now, let's say you're at the pain management doctor's office, and let's say that they're a good one. They really want to know what drugs, and they'll get a full panel. We used to be stuck with what was called the SAMHSA 5, and that we could only get 5, and remember, that's opiates. So some of the synthetics were not showing up. So now, a lot of the pain management doctors that we go to actually have a pretty full panel that they can do in their office. It's a point of care. Also, too, in the emergency department, what's sad in the emergency department that was revealed in my dissertation is the fact that they don't do a lot of drug testing. If I give Narcan to a patient in the ED and they come back, well, there's my drug test. And so what's happening is that because, again, of reimbursement, the doctors in the emergency departments especially are being pushed so hard to move people in and move people out because CMS, Joint Commission, they use metrics of door to discharge time. So what was revealed in my dissertation was that a lot of the doctors were not going to do drug testing for a couple of reasons. One, it didn't change their care. And 2, if they had to wait for the lab results to come back from an understaffed lab, what's that going to do? It's going to extend your door to discharge time. So what is that going to do? Get you in trouble. So they'll tell you, we just don't use, it was less than half use drug testing, at all. Now, I will say that things have gotten a little bit better, and a lot of that is due to the fact that the doctors reported that they can't test for synthetics. So things like fentanyl or methadone, they were actually having it either send them to the hospital lab, and 37% said that their hospital lab didn't even test for it. It had to be sent out. Well, can you imagine the cost associated with that? And that patient's already been discharged. So hopefully we are seeing more hospitals that are actually including full panels in the emergency department, something that can be gotten readily without having to send them to the lab. So I would just tell you that's yet another problem that's associated with this. Because remember, what do we say about heroin? It's a semi-synthetic. So as your point of care testing, even the emergency department going to pick that up. So that's of concern. The hospital laboratories, like I said, they are not full crime labs. They're not going to do the GCMS, the gas chromatography mass specs like we would do in a formal FDLE lab or a forensics lab like the medical examiners. So that's fine for law enforcement. If you're not liking what you're seeing, you can always ship something to FDLE. But for you guys that are just interviewing clients, patients, you're not going to have that option. And a lot of the doctors that you're going to go to are not as well. So I would tell you, you kind of want to be picky about what labs in your drug screening to make sure it's appropriate if you're trying to use this to find it. All right, so we kind of talked on a national level. In October of 2014, the 2013 annual report was released. By October of this year, we'll have another one, or at least a half years. So in the and this is strictly for Florida. This was released by FDLE and the Medical Examiners Commission. But in 2013, again, it goes back to what we're saying about the increase in heroin, that the occurrences of heroin increased by 70.1% and deaths increased by 78.7, rounded up 79%. So I mean, that's a huge jump. Again, we expected it, but I am still surprised at how much, especially because of the fact that we've really umped up treatment and we've really tried to ump up the awareness just through the opioids of getting help and getting treatment. I kind of hope that maybe we wouldn't see as much of the heroin rise, but we have. The drugs that are causing the most deaths, your heroin, your methadone, your fentanyl, and morphine were listing the cause of death in more than 50% of the deaths in which those drugs were found. So that's significant. I mean, in other words, we have a problem. You can see this, but I thought it was interesting as you see how the deaths have gone down, and at 2010, they were at their lowest, where when with our pill mills at their highest, around 2010. That's right. So, and what happened in 2011 when we finally started getting our arms around this thing, and hopefully at least getting a hand around it, is you started seeing by 2011, 2012, and 2013 that the heroin deaths have gone up, or heroin occurrences have gone up. They released this from the DEA, and this was just released 6 weeks ago, all right, March 28th this year, that the DEA is issuing a nationwide alert on fentanyl as a threat to public health. All right, so fentanyl, you already know from the slides that fentanyl and heroin are in that same class. All right, so you got to think that the person who can still get the fentanyl patches, so in other words, we still have work to do there, the person who can still get hold of the fentanyl patches, if they can't get those, or they can't get their heroin, vice versa, they're going to go back and forth. It's the same feeling. So if I can't get one, the euphoria is going to be the same regardless. So you can easily see it's kind of like switching from Motrin to Aleve. I mean, you're going to get the same drug. Essentially, it's just one's been termed, as illegal, and the other is still listed as legal as long as you have a script for it. So even though they're not the same chemical, to that patient's as what they perceive and what they feel, it is pretty much the same. Now, I was telling you about Delray Beach. I thought that was interesting. They talked about the fact that in the first 2 weeks of 2014, they seized more heroin in the last 10 years combined. All right, well, that's pretty dramatic. But again, what do we see over those 10 years? It was right about the turn of this. It was right about 2000 when we started seeing these big, steady, big increases in the opioids. Coincidentally, in 1995 is when we termed pain as the fifth vital sign. In 1998, under the influence of again insurance and the medical world's trying to treat pain. In 1998, we started establishing pain scores. And if some of you have been to your physicians, they've asked you, what is your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? In the hospitals, they have actually implemented those into the EMR. What is your pain? One of the things I objected to is when they said on a scale of 0 to 10. Okay, so Sharon, why are you worried about 1 versus 0? Because if I say if your pain on a scale of 0 to 10, what I'm essentially telling you is I should be able to get you to 0. And that's just not feasible. If you've just come out of surgery, you're going to hurt. I can give you meds, but you're still going to hurt. The whole goal of pain management is to bring it to a reasonable level that you can function. But right after surgery, we tell people, hey, you're going to hurt, okay? And that's normal, and it will get better. But I think what we've created, and let's just add this to the mix, is we've created Generation RX. I mean, everybody wants a drug to fix things. Do you want a better score on your test? Do you want to be better sexually? Do you want to play the stock market right? Do you want to, we've got a drug for everything now. And interestingly enough, in one of our surveys of the ED physicians, we asked them, if you do not prescribe a drug to the patient prior to discharge, what is the outcome? And I think it was 99.2%, as you will expect, a complaint. Everybody wants a drug now because we've created a generation of I want drugs, because they're afraid. These doctors are afraid. They're afraid if you come back and say, well, my pain was bad, and it's kind of like that gets lost, that you were actually the one that requested it. It's almost like they have to push it, Or, and we have seen a lot, and people say, oh, well, the doctors get kickbacks. That's pretty much, I'm not saying it never happens, but I'm saying there's pretty big stranglehold on that, now. So, but I think a lot of it just does arise from the fear of, oh my gosh, what if you have more pain and you've DC'd it? And also, too, I like the idea of DCing it because so many people will just stop. And if you're wired for opioids, then it will not take long for that dependency and addiction to start. I've only had one in my entire life. It was the most miserable experience I ever had. It was I was taking some antibiotics and I got a gastritis from it. And so part of what we have as a GI cocktail includes a very little of an opioid. It's like you used to give your kids paregoric, for stomach issues. I gotta tell you, that was the worst hour of my life. I felt like I was looking outside my head. So I was talking to one of our forensic psychiatrists, and I said, hey, listen, I don't get it, because it was miserable for me. He says, you're not wired for it. He said, that's obvious. He said, if you were, you would have thought it was the best drug on the planet. He said, you're wired for work addiction. You can call me next week for an appointment. I was like, no, I pay you, remember, for other things. So I got it. Everybody is wired differently. So it wasn't something that was desirable to you. But what's scary about this whole opioid, heroin, the whole thing is what people get from it. With the opioids, a lot of times that chronic pain patient, because they feel better, but they don't understand. And one of our doctors in St. Pete, I think, said this better. He said there's 3 types of pain. There's physical, there's emotional, and there's spiritual. He said when you take something like oxycodone, not only are we helping the physical, but we're also helping the emotional. So what happens? You feel less stressed when you're doing this. So what do you automatically equate that to? That's because my pain's better. But it's not. There's another component there that's acting, and that's the one that a lot of you in this room have to deal with, is what happens when they develop the dependency so quickly. And if they're wired for it, it can be pretty quick. Okay, we have a 3-star general. He's a special operator, very high in the chain, and you can actually go and Google him. I'll be glad to give you his name after this. But he actually got dependent on Percocets. His lumbar, what they call L2, 3, and 4, were just shattered. And he got to the point he couldn't walk, and he actually went on USA Today, above and below the fold, talking about how he had become dependent on an opioid, not through any illegal means. He was given to it. But I use that example because if a 3-star special operating general, and if you know anything about special operations, you know what I'm saying. If that guy can get dependent on this, then anybody can. Because this is a guy who fights through everything. They don't have pain. It's one of the things we teach in our classes. If you're medical in here tonight, you cannot treat special ops people. You can't say what's your pain, because they're going to tell you they're not in it. They're trained not to feel pain. And unfortunately, a lot of people emotionally are trained that well as well. So again, this is such a diverse subject, so I really want us to think, because I really think that the answers to our questions are in these rooms. Is like all of us coming together with ideas and what are we hearing from these patients, clients, arrestees, as far as what steps can we take, because this is scary. All right, one of the things that I think kind of brought a lot of attention to heroin deaths was Phil and Seymour Hoffman, dead at 46. I thought it was interesting though when I started reading this article. He had 70 bags of heroin. They released the report, after everything. Prescription drugs in his home. He had 20 hypodermic needles and 5 prescription drugs. One used by heroin addicts to help kick a habit, so I think we all know what that probably was. All right. Both are brands of heroin that are often cut with a powerful pain reliever called fentanyl, which has now become a plague in Pennsylvania. Fentanyl's been responsible for a lot of deaths. It's kind of wavy, but now that heroin's back up, we are seeing definitely more fentanyl. Black Death. I don't know if any of you know the term Black Death. We have operators in Chicago that teach for us, and I've also got guys out west. And we were actually going to London, and we were so excited. And I get this telephone call as I'm walking down the jetway to get on the plane. It was one of our detectives. He said, "I'm going in front of the grand jury. Tell me everything you know about Black Death and hurry." I said, "Well, I will hurry because they're about to tell me to shut off my phone." It's everywhere. So this whole thing with fentanyl and heroin is definitely not a new thing. So let's talk about, okay, so what can we do? Right, naloxone. Naloxone, the other name for this is Narcan. It is actually an opioid, all right? It's synthesized from thebaine. It lacks the psychoactive or addictive properties, though. And what naloxone does is it actually goes into those mu receptors I was telling you about, and it displaces the heroin, or it displaces the fentanyl. It essentially goes in there and, bumps them out of the way. And it blocks that receptor. So now all of a sudden the drug is essentially not hooked to the receptor anymore, so guess what? They're totally fine. All right, if you've ever seen naloxone given, is anybody in the room actually seen it given? Anybody seen Narcan given? Okay, when you give Narcan, they wake up and want to take a swing at you. Yes, yes, so whenever you give it, you step back, and these people are totally awake, aware, alert, and they are ready. They will rip their IVs out and they will be walking down the street. And so it is a very potent drug. So it does reverse your CNS events. And why do we like that? Well, because it keeps people from dying. And that's what I hope we're all here for. The chemical structure of naloxone is very similar of oxymorphone, right? And the only difference is the substitution of an N-methyl group with an allele. Okay, so you're going, oh, I don't like this. Okay, hang on with me for a second, because I want to show you why that's important. So when you think about the word naloxone, what it is it's N-al-ox-one. All right, it's naloxone. It is meant to reverse those types of drugs that it is similar to, which seems kind of crazy, but the substitution of that one group can make a big difference. I've been working with our officials in Tampa. I had the pleasure of serving for the Pinellas County or Board of County Commissioners and putting together a prescription drug advisory board that has been in place about 4 years now, and we work on legislation, we look at upcoming events, we look at ordinance as well. Now I've been asked to coordinate one in Tampa, Hillsborough County because of the synthetic drugs. And one of the biggest problems that we are seeing, and I know that you in law enforcement especially are going to know what I'm about to say, you change one group on the end of one of those, and what can happen? It's a different drug now that is no longer on the DEA watch list, and where's your prosecution? And so we are seeing this tremendously in the area of synthetic drugs, K2 spice, the quote-unquote synthetic cannabinoids. They're not even hitting those receptors anymore. When I was at the ME's office, we're looking at stuff going, what the heck is that? So we're actually doing some studies through USF now and working with those agencies. And please, if that isn't of interest to you, please do see me afterwards, because we'd like to have some contacts, outside of our county, as well. But again, going back to naloxone and Narcan, it is classified by the FDA as a prescription drug. Therefore, it has to be prescribed. Naloxone prescribers do have concerns about liability, and they should. We've already had a situation in the emergency department where more and more families are being trained in the use of Narcan, naloxone for chronic pain patients. So one of our fears has been is that as people start getting more access to naloxone, what happens? So sure as the world, comes in the other night, guy brings in his girlfriend, she's an opioid, she's a heroin overdose, and he is screaming at the ER group, just give her the Narcan like we have at home. And everybody's like, what did he say? So there you go. We all know that anything that's used for good can be used for bad. One of our concerns is we're going to start seeing the designated shooter, and I know I have a lot of people that say, that's ridiculous. Well, I've seen them, and I'd like to tell you it's not, but it's human nature. It's just like the opioids. Opioids were used for a lot of good things until people started abusing. So one of the concerns that prescribers do have is obviously liability. They try and get the families and say, you need to keep tight reins on this. But what do we have with the opioids? you had patients, chronic pain patients, that their drugs were being, diverted away from them. So again, I have concerns about this. I'm not saying I disagree with that, but I do have concerns. Also, too, when we look at SAMHSA, and I'm sure most of you all are familiar with the term SAMHSA, it was established in 1992, and one of the goals right now that SAMHSA is working hard on is what they call their toolkit, and that is the training of patients and their families in the use of Narcan, Naloxone. Now, with this, we try and give facts for the community, and you can Google this. I mean, you can go to DOH. You can actually get information about this very easily. Safety advice for patients, information for prescribers to try and get them to understand it's okay. And in some states, they actually have established legislation protecting the prescriber for this. So you want to look for resources for overdose survivors, and it is available at no charge on SAMHSA's website. All right, so these are the big things. We want to go evidence-based guidance for safe prescribing practice, so identifying patients at risk who are already predisposed. But again, we are incorporating these same people that do have chronic pain and are legit patients for this. They encourage the prescribing of naloxone in conjunction with other opioid prescriptions, especially the initial. So why do you think that is? Why is SAMHSA going, hey, let's give naloxone, especially if it's a first-timer? Because they have no idea what's going to happen when they start taking these drugs. I have no idea between you and you, if I give you the same dose, you're the same weight, the age, I can see two totally different responses. A lot of it depends on what other medications are on board. Is there alcohol involved? And so that's why it's important for us to train and to provide it, especially with initial opioid prescriptions. If they're on long-term opioid therapy, I'm going to show you a little device. Has anybody heard of SVO in the room? Okay, good. I'm going to introduce that to you. But this is patients on long-term opioid therapy are being provided with this device. And then patients, for patients at risk for drug overdose, we know that they have histories. What do I do with a patient who's got a drug history but who is a legitimate chronic pain patient now? I mean, we've got to still establish their pain and treat them. All right, so looking at this, SVO is an auto-injector. I'm sure everybody in the room has heard about the EpiPens, like EpiPens for people with allergic responses. I even saw a commercial for one the other day. All right, well, this is the same takeoff on the EpiPen, but it's an SVO pen. It's been FDA approved. It's actually we call it a double barrel because the families are trained that if they come in and they see the pulmonary edema, the pinpoint pupils, the low heart rates, low respirations, is what they can do is they can pop the SVO pen and shoot them once, with it, just like an EpiPen, very easy to use. It even talks to you. In my car the other day, I accidentally bounced it, and all of a sudden a man's voice was coming out of my console, and I was scrambling trying to find what the world was that. But it talks you right through it. And if they're not responding in 3 to 5 minutes, it'll actually give you a second dose. All right, it's about the size of a cell phone, maybe a little bit smaller, and you can actually go to the SVO website, and I have to thank them for a lot of, granting us permission to show the device. But I mean, this is certainly an excellent device, and in the right hands, can certainly save lives. Now, okay, so let's talk about this, just kind of as a wind up, and then I'll be happy to take questions. There is concern that with giving this through this manner, or for law enforcement, what they are suggesting is to use an intranasal naloxone. All right, and it's very easy to use. You just put it up the nose, you squirt it in. It would have to be used for a patient who is still breathing, because obviously if they're dead with no circulation, this is not going to be beneficial. But there are some concerns, about this. Again, I want you to hear my heart on this, so that I'm not saying that we should not be considering giving this. And we're going to talk about the House and Senate bills that are actually on the floor right now with regards to this. But one of the concerns that we do have is that if you give an intranasal naloxone, that's a full hit of naloxone. What we do as paramedics, as emergency department responders, is we actually give the drug IV. And by giving it intravenously, I can titrate. Do you understand that word as far as that? Titrate just means that I can give it to the point that I want to give it. And what I do is I look for the effects. They're breathing fine, their heart rate's coming up, their color is coming back, but I'm not totally waking them up, because just like you said, if I wake them up totally, they may become agitated, violent, and they may be storming out of my presence. So the concern with naloxone is if you give it and they wake up, what are you going to do with them? And I think that this needs to be addressed. Now, we all know that the legislative session ended, short time ago, and this bill was not voted upon. I mean, per my bill tracker, it was still on the floor when the session ended, which I was kind of glad because I think we need a little bit more time to talk about this. It's kind of like looking at a present, and the wrapping looks really good, but when you start opening it up, there are some concerns inside. All right, so we know that if we wake them up, what's going to happen? All right, well, they're going to be cognizant. They could pass a field sobriety test. So what are we going to do with them? You take them to the hospital. So you're the cop on the street. You just jetted them up with naloxone. Now they're wide awake. What's your first question going to be? Did you do this intentionally? And what are they going to say? No. All right. So there goes your Baker Act, all right? Marchman Act. If you study the Marchman Act, because I have a lot of people say, oh, well, you can just use the Marchman Act. You need to read the Marchman Act, because to do an immediate, capture of this person, you have to have an immediate threat. They're no longer a threat. The EMS is going to check them out. They're going to say their heart rate's stable, their vital signs are stable. They can even pass a field sobriety test, and they're like, you don't have anything on me. I'm walking. All right, so where's the concern is if they walk in 45 minutes when this drug wears off, what are we going to do? Can you follow them for 45 minutes? No. So my concern is definitely about the deaths. It's the second one. So what's going to happen? So this was the first report, and I just found this. This was written in 2011. It said no deaths associated with patient refusal of transport after naloxone reversed opioids, but these were given IV. All right, and so that's my concern. And even the take-home point that when I was reading through it at the end, it says it's unknown if long-acting opioids or opiates can be safely treated with intranasal administration. Well, you don't know what drug they took. Some of these opioids are a lot longer acting than others. And I don't know what else they have on board. So I do think that there's reason for concern, because now let's take it back to the dollar sign. You let them walk. The next morning, we get a call for Signal 7, a dead body behind the shop and go. It turns out to be that person that we gave the naloxone to, and now they're dead. And not only are they dead, but somebody's going to get a lawsuit. That's the biggest concern among my attorneys right now, is what is our civil liability? Do we need to do something called the Naloxone Act? We've all been trying to put our heads together, and what are we going to do for this? Like the Naloxone Act would be something similar to a Baker Act, where it just said, if you were incapacitated and we reversed you, you have to go to the hospital for 2 hours. It's not like a full Baker Act. In 2 hours, if you're still fine, you can walk out the door. Okay, so what are the concerns there? Is they didn't meet, we've got to have the legislation, but the expense, who's going to pay the bill? Who's going to pay the ER bill? Who's going to pay, the EMS bill? Because they're saying, I didn't want to go, you made me go, and I'm not paying, So I'm just saying, I sit in the middle of the room and I listen to all the sides. And I know that we can come up with an answer, or at least hopefully something toward, a positive end. But I do think that we do need to be very on top of this as far as what are the other repercussions. And also, are we going to set up the designated shooter? I hate to say that, but I told you I teach emergency medicine. For the last 3 months, in every class I have taught, and I teach 5 a week, and these are all different people, every class, I have asked my ER people, especially, I said, what do you think? And I explained the new Opioid Overdose Reduction Act, and I've got to tell you, I don't have one who's in favor of it, because they've seen the human nature side. They've seen the side that says, somebody is going to start abusing this. So I don't know, what do we do? Do we balance how many lives that may be saved on the ones that may be lost, or more addiction, happening with this? We've all seen what happened with the opioids, and I think we're all a little spooky about that. It's like, are we going to be opening another can of worms here? But do we all want to save lives? Sure. That's the major goal, I hope, of everybody in this room. Heaven knows, I hope you're not in it for the money if you're in this room tonight, because you're not the ones with the 6 figure salaries. You're the people in the trenches that are helping to hopefully reduce this. So I so appreciate the opportunity to talk to you tonight, and maybe even throw this out is just that, we do have a bill, that is present, and you can actually see, you can track this bill. It was laid on the table on April 24th. But it was not decided upon because, as we know, the session ended. So it might be worth talking to your legislators. It might be worth talking to people that are involved in your committees. And this is one of the concerns that I do have, of the states that have passed this, we haven't been able to, and maybe it's out there and we just can't find it, but I've had some pretty good legislative snoopers that have been trying to find any programs where they actually track the results. That study I just showed you was the only one in the whole United States that we've found. So my concern is, are we tracking what happens after the naloxone is given? Are they going to the hospital? Are they walking away? And the thing is that who is going to be responsible for taking their name over the next 1 day, 2 days, and going to the ME's office and saying, okay, did they show up on the dead list? I think you're talking money now with understaffed departments. So I'm just saying, I'd like your brains to be thinking when you leave here today that this is present, and probably when the session opens the next time it is going to be dealt with. We need to be thinking, is this the right thing for us? And if it is the right thing for us, we need to look inside the package and just make sure we're prepared, for the sequelae that could come with this. All right. Jess, do you want to open the floor for questions, have them write them down? How do you want to handle it?
Thank you very much for that information, Dr. Kelly. I think that's a very tremendous, impressive presentation. I just have one particular question. How many states have providing training for naloxones nowadays?
Now that's
through the Compassionate Act, which I've seen from the federal pages.
Okay, that's a good question. To the last time that I checked in fact, Lieutenant Zito, maybe you'll help, I believe it was 13 states. The question is the training, and that was one of the things that on that particular bill that has been a point of controversy, is that at one point they stripped the training regulations off of it. And I definitely think if we're going to give it, that people need to be trained, whether it's the layperson, whether it's the law enforcement officer or first responder. I think that's critical. I really do. It's a great point. I think it's critical. And it's interesting that you said it, because we were just talking the other day in our meeting about that, as they've stripped the training, part of it. We don't know where it is right now because session ended, but that's a great point. I'm with you. I think I share your heart that we need the training on it. Anybody else?
From a toxicology perspective, what do you think of long-term use of methadone versus Suboxone, when the concern is that if they're not on a long-term med, they could relapse and go back to the heroin, particularly nowadays?
And I don't mean to take a politically correct answer here, but I don't know that I have an answer for that. And you know why? Is because everybody responds differently. We have some people go on methadone and within 2 months they're totally off or less. I have other people that just seem to stay on and stay on and stay on, and I have to start questioning. It was my understanding that methadone was never supposed to be used as a long-term pain treatment or to bring people off. So Suboxone, I thought, was a good answer for us when it first came out. But again, the people that are trained in Suboxone would still say it's not supposed to be long-term. What do you do, though, when you're the addictionologist or the provider and the person says they still have these issues? That's where, again, I think the psych, the mental health, the faith-based is really important. So why are we still dealing with those issues? We always tell people, who've undergone surgery, at 3 days, you should be starting to feel a little bit better from that pain. And if you're not, then we need to go back in and we need to find out what's going on. So if you took that to a mental health aspect, we need to find out what's still going on, that you're still essentially emotionally dependent, on the methadone. Like I said, I thought the Suboxone was a good answer when it came out because it is a partial opioid agonist. They're not getting the same highs. I thought it was a good way to maybe wean people off. And I do think, in talking to my pain management society, that they have actually seen better. Now, again, I know I've got people that argue that with me because they're very pro-methadone, but I think we've seen, personally, and the people I know, they think they like it better. How's that?
I come from the background of working in an emergency department. I've met you many years ago, Sharon. Thank you very much for coming today.
Nice to see you again.
In the emergency department, I do see our physicians utilizing something on the computer that nurses are not permitted to access as well. But it's a means for finding out these people that come in and are seeking drugs.
Mm-hmm.
When they do find that information, however, I don't see them not giving the D drug, Dilaudid, but I guess it helps them form a treatment plan. In other words, not giving them a prescription for much more than 3 days. But nonetheless, I don't know if that would really stop hospital shopping for narcotics. What is your perspective on that?
Well, I was privileged to work on the prescription drug monitoring program database. We were the task force. It was a board that was served, and we fought hard for that prescription drug database, the monitoring program to stay, the PDMP to stay in effect. Again, I have to give credit to General Bondi on that. Okay, so we've got a really good tool, but I'm not sure, Danny, if you've ever been to Washington. I see one of my colleagues here, but I've gone to the PDMP meetings, and one of the things that's routinely said is it's underused. So that became an issue with a lot of people for funding, is if we're not using it, why should we fund it? But it's kind of, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg. So I want you all to put yourself in the role of the emergency department physician. Okay, first of all, you're working on a time clock. And one of the questions that I asked them in my dissertation survey was, how many of you all use it? And I think it was 20% always use it. The majority did not, or they only occasionally used it. Okay, so you're asking, well, why? It's free. Well, we asked why, and they were things like it was time consuming. That was the number one. It was time consuming because they had to be the ones to go on. The passwords kept changing, and they didn't want to go back in and take the time to reestablish passwords. So they listed it as not being exactly user-friendly for somebody who's under a time constraint. Now, if you're a private practice doctor who knows this patient is coming in 2 weeks from now, you've got that time. But the ER doctor who's being slammed does not have it. Okay, so here's another concern that they expressed, is patient satisfaction scores. Now, if you're in medicine, you know that the patient satisfaction scores make the world go round. Press-Ganey is a term that you're probably familiar with. So what happens if you refuse to write that patient pain meds, and we've already talked about that, and they say, well, they didn't treat my pain. They didn't treat it adequately. They can expect a complaint. We already said that 40% of the doctors are disciplined for that. Okay, so let's move it on to another area. You're the ER doctor, and so you look her up, and sure as the world, she's got evidence of doctor shopping. She's seen 7 different ERs in the last 30 days. All right, are you going to report her? So now you have to worry, is this a HIPAA violation? That was another thing they were concerned. A lot of people say, no, it is not a HIPAA violation. You're required, but the majority of our doctors are not aware of that. All right, so here's another problem. Let's say that I do check that database. I find out that you're a strong doctor shopper and you're in pain. So what happens if I say, okay, I'm only going to give you 6 because I know that you're a known doctor shopper, and you take one of those, and the first thing you do is you crash into somebody at the next intersection and you kill them. And they're going to be able to track that you knew they were a doctor shopper, and guess what? You're going to be on somebody's hit list for litigation. They are dreadfully concerned about that. So, I hate to say it, and I certainly can't speak for all emergency department physicians, but this is based on my dissertation research. And I have a lot of friends that are good ED doctors, and it breaks their heart too. But if you don't give them something, they will be in trouble. If you do give them something, they will be in trouble. And by going onto the PDMP, you're just opening yourself up for more liability. Now, I hate to tell you that, but it is what it is. And that is something that, again, I think our ER doctors deserve protection too if they're going to go on and check, because how else do we not continue to propagate this epidemic? And being in the ED, you know what I'm saying. So again, unfortunately, a lot of my ER doctors are now referring to the ER as the new pill mill, because we are seeing so many, because they know that they can't get their drugs elsewhere. So I said this 5 years ago, is I have never in my entire career seen any topic that was so convoluted with different problems, that we all have to think through. So we are definitely having to bond together and come up with better, 2,000 heads are better than one, right? You know, but these are very real problems that we do have to address, and we have to appreciate if we're gonna start kicking this. And like you said, if they're still on opioids, we have to acknowledge the heroin, the fentanyl, all rising with it. Any other questions? Again, I thank you so much for your time. I'm going to be hanging out, so please do feel free. I've got cards with me if you have any questions. Also, too, about the synthetics. You know, please do if you have any issues with that. We'd love to possibly partner, and I'm here.
And thank you, everyone. If you have an opportunity, there are some yellow forms on there. Please fill out those. Those are our evaluation tool. We are looking forward to being able to provide these sort of events in the future, so any information would be helpful on those. So thank you, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you. And please do note my cell phone is on there, and do not hesitate. That thing goes off 24/7, so please don't hesitate to call if you have questions. Jessica, thank you again for the opportunity.